Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our demystifying carbon credits from sequestration to accreditations workshop. This is day one of the workshop, so welcome everyone. We're very excited to have you here. Our main speaker for today is Dr. Michele Menegon. His talk is titled Carbon Credits, Markets and Projects. We'll go over the key learning outcomes for our session today. So you should, by the end of the session, know what carbon credits are and know how they function in global climate action, why they matter for nature and people, from forest protection to local livelihoods, what makes a credible project, including monitoring there's something in the way there, permanence and real impact. And then last but not least, let me just move us out of the way again. Why integrity is essential to build trust and ensure lasting conservation outcomes. Michele, the floor is yours.
But good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be here. And I'm gonna share the screen. And by going through the presentation and our discussion, I hope to be able to clarify some points and maybe to give some hope. Because as many things that human beings produce or create, the carbon credit concept and the actual carbon credits we trade can be used to improve the overall situation or to speculate on them, or even to worsen the overall situation. So, but basically what we can do is to be, to be the one that actually drive the change in a certain direction. Otherwise, there's only the others doing it. Then, as a little bit of introduction, I'm not a carbon credit expert, so it's not something that I have studied. Of course, I went through a lot of information, but I'm someone that, with a team, have implemented a project in the last few years, and we went all the way to certification, and we already have a few hundreds people on the ground planting hundreds of hectares of forest. And by doing this in a specific country, which is Tanzania, I had to go through the national policy, the international standard, what they mean, what are the requirements, the auditing, the financial part. So we had to go through a lot of challenges because we thought that carbon credits is actually an opportunity, and this has justified the fact that we actually went through a lot of challenges. Another thing I wanted to say at the beginning is, please, of course, I will go through the presentation, but I think the most important part will be our interaction. And again, I can reply hopefully with competence on certain things because it's something that I have experienced on the ground. And I might actually divert you to online resources in the case of, certain information I'm not in the position to give because they are related to things I didn't experience firsthand. Okay, regarding the presentation, I'm gonna talk in general about carbon credit, carbon project, challenges and opportunities, but always with a mind and with reference to the actual project we are being implementing. So I have that kind of experience, and I hope it will help to understand what can be done on the ground by individuals, companies. Before moving to the first slide, I would say one thing about the project in general. as we will discover, carbon credit is a tool. It can be used in various ways. Is a financial product, so it can be also object of speculation. And we know out there's a lot of people who actually do things because of money positioning, and the carbon credit can be used as one of the many tools they can use to achieve their goals. But it's also a fantastic opportunity, potentially, to turn conservation into something that can be financially sustainable for very long term. I have to say that this is already an element that has two sides. First, we should recognize the value of nature and ecosystem services without necessarily turn them into something that can be marketed. But we live in a world where things work that way. So even if I'm not happy from a philosophical point of view in turning this into something that can be sold, traded, is probably right now the only way to make it working. So it's since the very beginning a compromise, but I think it can be turned into a good compromise. Okay, what is a carbon credit? We have seen already that you know it very well from the quiz. But again, I think I would like to stress the fact that the carbon credit is something that represents something, real out there, theoretically, meaning that in theory, as soon as it's issued, there should be an avoided um, ton of CO2 equivalent or a removed ton of CO2 equivalent somewhere, but it's not always the case. Again, it's also a financial product, and many people see it as a financial product. I was at the COP28 in Dubai a couple of years ago, I think, and I was, let's say, surprised by the fact that in many of the debates, many of the little conferences happening throughout the the stands, the role of the local communities was almost non-existing. And in one of these debates, the interviewer asked a carbon credit expert, but from a financial perspective, what was the main take for him regarding the debate. And he said, I never realized that actually we have to work with people on the ground. And this was interesting because basically there was a lot of people discussing carbon credits as a financial product, as a financial opportunity that can be, harnessed by big companies, corporations, brokers, while actually there's no carbon credit if local community in the context of the national policy of the country where this happened are fully integrated into the process. And this is a very important step. A very brief information regarding the type of carbon market, probably something you know already. We are in this presentation and in general, when we, private people, companies, NGOs talk about carbon credits, we discuss about the voluntary market. Because there's a compliance market where countries can trade carbon between them and work on improving the way they produce, the industrial processes in a way to comply with the commitments of the Paris Agreement. But in that case, as you see, they have legally binding regulation, there's the government oversight, while in the voluntary market, the private initiative can be taken into account and it could lead to projects. So from now onward, we don't care about the compliance market, but we discuss about the voluntary market. There's two main ways of setting up a carbon project. a project that will eventually will produce and put on the market carbon credits. And we have one big component called avoidance or reduction, meaning that you do activities that avoid the emission of new carbon into the atmosphere. And probably the most well-known example is the RED project, where they are implemented in places where there's already a forest, where there's a trend of forest destruction, which is well documented, and that represents the baseline. We will see it later also. And by implementing a certain set of action, the project reduce the level of forest destruction, and the delta, the difference between the baseline trend and the measured trend, so what the reduction would have been without the project and what the reduction of deforestation is actually with the project, in that delta, in that difference, you produce carbon credits. I tell you already that it's very interesting because it's a tool to reduce the destruction of the existing forest, so the existing stock of carbon on the planet, but there's a lot of room for cheating, a lot of room for playing games, because it's very difficult to be able to measure properly the baseline and also to be able to measure the actual achievement in terms of reduction. But we will discuss this a little bit later. So avoidance or reduction projects, very important, but complex to be measured. Another type of project, which is our project, so I know it better, is a project in the area of removal, meaning that you implement an activity that actually, instead of avoiding the emission of CO2 into the atmosphere, actually removes CO2 from the atmosphere. For example, planting a tree. A tree is basically a natural carbon sink. In this case, it's a little bit easier to measure the actual achievement because you go to a place where there's no trees and must be a place where in the past there were trees. So I say this because there has been examples of companies planting trees in natural grasslands, which means destroying a natural environment, a natural habitat. So trees must be planted in places where they were in the past and they've been removed. But in this case, measuring the effect is easier because you have a bare land with no trees, you plant trees, and you can measure the actual trees growing over time. So the baseline is quite easy, and the measuring that, let's say, is never easy, but it's easier than in the avoidance or reduction example. And even from satellite, you can see how the landscape change while trees are growing, and biomass can be measured. So these are the two main type of carbon credit projects. I would say so. I say that our project, and the project I know better, is a removal project. So removing CO2 from the atmosphere. I know you probably all know this very well, but just to stress the fact that we are working with trees. So there's a natural carbon sink out there, it's called tree. And through the photosynthesis, meaning, taking water and nutrients from the ground and CO2 from the atmosphere and energy from the sun, through the photosynthesis, it stores carbon into the tree structure while growing. So trees are free, available ways to store carbon. Of course, the level of the problem, the magnitude of the problem, means that to really cope with the situation we are facing in terms of climate crisis, we should plant billions of trees in a relatively short period of time. And probably to really face the challenge properly, we have also to complement the tree planting with other type of intervention. Most of it changing the way we produce. But of course, this is very hard to achieve because there's a completely another debate. But you know, there's a lot of politics involved, and let's say not necessarily there's an actual will from big corporation and government to really go that way, while there's a will to look good, and often they're trying to find the right balance between not doing exactly what they are supposed to do, but to look good. And but I mean, in case we can discuss this later during our discussion. Something else I would like to stress about the trees is basically the way you consider your carbon pool. So where is the carbon that I actually account for in my project? As you can see from the slide, you have the above ground carbon, which is the actual tree that you see, the biomass of the trees and or the trees that you see. You have the below ground biomass and the related carbon, and you have the soil carbon. Of course, this is a kind of a living thing. So basically continuously there's carbon transfer from above ground to below ground till soil and above ground biomass reach a balance. And of course, when the tree die, and if you, for example, if the project is a forest restoration project, the decaying wood on the ground will release a bigger part of the CO2 back into the atmosphere. If trees get burned, they release back the CO2 back in the atmosphere. So we have to always take into account all of these variables. Another thing to be taken into account is that if you plant trees, they start storing carbon quite efficiently and rapidly while they are growing. But according to the type of tree and the type of forest, at some point they reach a plateau, meaning that they become very important as habitat, for example, for biodiversity, for or climate regulation, ecosystem services. But the level of increase in carbon storage get to actually to a plateau with little increase over time. But for the first, it depends again on the type of forest, between 30 and 100 years, the level of carbon increase quite rapidly while the trees are growing, while the forest is actually being restored. Okay, let's go to how a project works. Just a second. I have to say that when we started as a team exploring the possibility of doing a carbon project, I was very excited by the opportunity. I'm still excited by the opportunity. I see it as still a very important opportunity. But as always, there's a lot of barriers. Barriers are some barriers to actually achieving what we are supposed to achieve. As I said before, is the fact that there's quite a lot of room for speculation and cheating and, let's say, not to do things the way they are supposed to be or to do. But also the way is designed can represent a barrier. And actually, I think a big improvement would be to design the way a project is implemented in a way that small entities can enter the market and can implement project. I think there's room to do this. I think it's possible to do it, but it's not yet there. Because now being able to comply with the national policy and international policies means, and international standards means a big investment and means projects that have a certain size in order to be able to cover all the cost of the first few years in a context where the future income are greatly I mean, they are much bigger in order, so those costs are actually possible to be sustained. As you can see from the slide, you have a project design phase, and later I will discuss what are the main things to take into account. You have a registration phase, meaning that you design your project and then you try to register it to a standard. And there are several standards, big and small, and standards are different. There are some are, more caring about the local communities, for example, or caring more about the co-benefits for the communities and the biodiversity, other caring less, and so on. So even the choice of the standard is something that can be explored very, very seriously. Then there's a phase in which once the project has been registered with the standard and validated, you start the activities that can be protecting a forest or planting, restoring a forest. And you have the phase which lasts for the entire duration of the project of MRV, meaning measurement, reporting, and verification, which is very important. And they are often, in the case of, let's say, lack of integrity, is where there's room for playing a little bit the results and, let's say, force the numbers to be what they are actually not in reality. But let's say when you start measuring and your measurements and reporting and valuation are validated, you can start issuing the carbon credit. Usually it takes between 3 and 5 years to be able to do it. Means that there's 5 years with no income. Means that you have investors or you have donors that help you to cover this period. Again, we will discuss this a little bit later as well. Then a very important thing you see at the end of the slide, there's the last phase is called the retirement. The retirement is a very important part because basically when a carbon credit is issued, it goes into a registry and it can have a long or a short life. If it has a short life, means that it's retired soon after is issued. Means that the value of that carbon credit is still strongly linked with the action on the ground that have been implemented in order to produce it, in order to issue. So if one carbon credit means a certain amount of work by a farmer in Tanzania or Zimbabwe or Botswana or Costa Rica somewhere, and a certain number of trees that are being cared, a certain number of time which has been, allocated. So that all that work is still linked with the carbon credit. And if it's retired, there's no speculation. If it is not retired, it can be traded as any financial product on the market, means that it gains value without that value being linked to something that happened on the ground. So it becomes like detached from the actual production process that has been implemented in order to produce it. And in my opinion, that shouldn't happen. So I think a company, an NGO, an enterprise with integrity should possibly retire all the credit they produce soon after the issuance. Means that there's direct relationship with work on the ground, benefits to the community, benefits to biodiversity, and the existence of credit. As soon as this relationship is no longer there, the credit must disappear. This is like, just to stress a little bit that avoidance project and removal project are both very important, both potentially extremely relevant in terms of combating climate change, forest restoration and forest conservation, habitat protection, and restoration of ecosystem services and ecosystem functioning. But the level of integrity that you need in order to make sure that what you are doing and what you claim are strongly linked in the avoidance project, like the RED project, is much, much higher. Because measuring an existing forest over a large area and measuring the changes that your action are actually producing on that forest is very difficult. Also, those changes must be changes that you are actually implementing, because sometimes changes are because the social setting around the forest is changing, because there's a new factory and people are just moving out from the forest. So it's not easy to understand that you are putting all the needed additionality, the adding all what is needed to really decrease the level of deforestation. By contrast, as I said before, the removal project, where there's no trees, I'm planting trees and measuring something that wasn't there before, so it's easy, are actually more easy to be measured, and there's less room for cheating. But they are much more complex and much more expensive in terms of setting them up. Okay, again, stressing about what any project is going to do for the entire duration. And the entire duration of a project usually is 30, 40, 50, 60, many, many years, because all these projects make sense if they last for a very long period of time. Let's say until the forest reach the plateau, could be one element to take into account. And MRV is going out there, having permanent plots where you measure all the changes and measuring in a very thorough way the changes in your restored forest or in your protected forest. Means boots on the ground, means going with a laser to measure the height or a scale. And for example, in the case of the picture, when you have a tree with buttresses, you have actually to measure the bole of the tree above the buttresses. So you have to find solutions to reach that point. But again, MRV is something that could be a limiting factor, because if you have a project of 5,000 or 10,000 hectares, you need a lot of different permanent plots where you measure, so you need a lot of efforts, which on one side means also a lot of training for local communities, members, a lot of capacity building, a lot of employment. So when you design the project, of course, you also consider all these elements, all these, side opportunities in terms of job creation, for example, are part of the project, which is good. Of course, measurement can also be done through remote sensing, the LiDAR, which is now could be quite efficient, but ground truthing, so going on the ground and check that what you have measured through a drone with a camera, with a specialized camera, or through satellites is actually true, is always a very important step. Okay, this to me is the most important slide of the whole presentation, because when you design a project and when you implement the project, those four elements are the really fundamental ones. First, additionality. You have to make sure that what you are actually bringing to the area, to the project, to the forest, to the communities, with the project is additional. It wouldn't have happened without the project. Not even in case of course, in the foreseeing future, in case of new investment by companies on agriculture or things like that, or changing in social setting, new infrastructure that brings new life to the people, new investments. So you have to do a really serious analysis that what you are going to bring for the next 20, 30 years wouldn't have come without the project. Otherwise, you are making money on something that would have happened already, even without you. And that's a form of, let's say, the results are at least partly not genuine. So additionality, very important thing. I go to a place, I see the place, and I understand what are the dynamics, what is happening. Is getting better connected to the market, is getting better connected to possible investors in other sectors, and so on. If this is happening, I have to take this into account and reduce the value of what I'm going to bring. If it's a remote area, no infrastructure, poor roads, not effective connection with the market for the agricultural products and so on, and I'm going to bring a project that actually is forest protection or forest restoration and agroforestry or improved agriculture, in that case, I can be confident that what I'm bringing as a project wouldn't have been there without it. That's very important. Second thing, permanence. Of course, it does make less sense to set up a project in which we restore a forest for 30 years, and at the end of the contract with the implementers, which usually are members of the local communities, farmers, people inhabiting and owning the land, they cut down everything or they burn the forest to open up again areas for farming. In that case, it's a problem because basically all the carbon which is stored goes back directly into the atmosphere, and this could happen in weeks. So you have been working for 30 years, and then in few weeks of large fires, you lose everything. Means that you have to embed into your project design a way to make sure that the forest you have restored or the forest you have protected remains on site or remains protected. Means working on policies, means working on mechanisms that go beyond the duration of contracts, means working on education and local policies, bylaws in the villages, all these elements that once the forest is back, is ensured that it stays there. Once the forest is better protected, that better protection stays in place. So second very important element, permanence. Leakage, third very important element. You know, especially local communities in rural areas rely a lot on natural resources like making charcoal, firewood, hunting, poaching. Even if poaching is illegal, is actually a resource they rely on. And when you establish a project, you have, of course, you plant trees or you protect forest, but also you have a lot of different side activities, including protecting biodiversity, because, and we will go there in a second, co-benefits include biodiversity protection. But leakage happens and it needs to be reduced, mitigated. Otherwise, again, the project won't achieve what it's supposed to achieve. When you prevent the people to, for example, to cut trees from the project area to produce charcoal, but they just go to the nearby area, to the nearby forest, to do what they were doing in your project areas before. In this case, you just displace the problem. So this meaning that policies and actions and interventions and mechanisms to avoid leakage must be in place. And again, is always a multi-layer approach. Education, creating alternatives, creating, for example, commercial woodlots that can be used for various purposes. So this needs to be designed at the beginning of the project because leakage is one of the possible big issues. Also, all of these things, additionality, permanence, and leakage, if they're not designed properly, they can prevent the project to be registered, means that you can't issue carbon credits. Then the fourth important element is co-benefits. Co-benefits means that in the project areas, all the relevant variables are taken into account. The livelihood of the local communities, their income, the quality of the water, the healthcare, and biodiversity protection. It depends on the situation, but all these elements needs to be packaged together, you know, all with all the main action that the project is going to undertake on the ground. And when all these elements are packed together, means that actually you can issue a high quality carbon credit. And this is a very important element. So is, in my opinion, is preferable to invest more, means to spend more on the ground in terms of co-benefits, and to issue a carbon credit that include all these co-benefits, and they can be demonstrated, and to issue the carbon credit at a higher price. Means that you have less people willing to buy it, but the right people willing to buy it. So even among the buyers, there's people who buy carbon credits again as a financial product, and they might look at cheap ones in order to be able to resell them at a higher price. But if you find a company which is really serious about their commitments towards, you know, forest restoration, climate change, forest protection, improve community livelihood, usually they are willing to spend more for a carbon credit. They care about their reputation, and they retire the carbon credits as soon as is issued. In that case, having a high quality carbon credits with all the co-benefits included is extremely important. And my suggestion is go for them. Don't go for the cheap one. An example of the cheap one. You can, of course, store carbon in a plantation. You plant 1 or 2 species of trees in big areas. I mean, you don't care about the understory, you don't care about the complexity of the forest structure, you don't care about the species composition, you don't care about having the right trees that actually trigger biodiversity recovery because they allow a better seed dispersal, impollination. So you don't care about all those things. Of course you have the trees, of course you have the carbon storage, but it's actually an extremely poor habitat, not natural at all. Restoring a natural forest is a much bigger effort, but it will pay back when you issue the carbon credit because they will be possibly at the highest possible value. Again, staying on the positive side of the carbon credit opportunities, they can create a lot of benefits for nature. Of course, they is a financial vehicle that can incentivize long-term forest protection, the biodiversity co-benefits I just mentioned, and then also all the monitoring and enforcement. Usually when you do a project, you have to make sure that the forest you are working with is protected. So you trigger law enforcement, usually in collaboration with government agencies. And you trigger also a change of a sort of a mindset. At the very beginning of our project, some of the farmers told us, if you don't cut the tree, how can you pay us? Because of course they see the tree gaining value once it's cut and turned into planks that can be sold or construction poles. 3-4 years into the project, many of them have understood, and this is actually something new. that the trees gain value by growing, by being alive. So there's already, let's say, an internal debate at village level, where there's the people who maybe haven't been following the project closely. They still think that to get any value from a tree, you need to cut it down. But there's already fellow people in the village explaining them that actually no, it's possible to gain value from the tree by just keeping it there. And basically the main achievement of a project is having an entire community that shift from the previous concept to the new concept, where having a live forest nearby, there's a lot of value, also monetary value. Then, of course, monitoring and enforcement and caring about the nurseries and planting and weeding is all job creation. So a project can create dozens of or hundreds or thousands of new jobs, both permanent and seasonal. And this, of course, also is extremely important. Then again, you benefit people, as I just said. Something that two elements that I want to point out is land tenure strengthening. When, as a project, you work with farmers in many countries of Africa, they don't have actually title deed of their land. So something that the project trigger is the process for the people participating to the project to get all the necessary documents to be able to demonstrate that that piece of land is their land. And this is a very good process, because when they get those documents, they can also go to a bank and have a little loan and set up additional activities, little commerce and so on. So strengthening land tenure is very, very important, and is an extremely positive side effect of carbon project, because of course you need to demonstrate that the land where the project is happening has all the right paperwork in place. Then you strengthen community governance, because usually this project involves hundreds, if not thousands of people. Means that the entire village or the villages, they have actually undertake a process where all the governance is strengthened. And this is also a very good positive. As I said at the beginning, and maybe we can discuss this, integrity is a big issue. The price of carbon credits have been increasing for several years, and then in 2004 it dropped down quite seriously. And one of the reasons is a lot of scam projects, big projects which were not doing well. And I'm not saying, probably there's both projects which were poorly designed, or a little bit naive in terms of being able to really measure what you're doing and the achievements of what you're doing. I think there were also projects that were designed to be a scam. So just as vehicles, to make quick money and speculate on the carbon credit product. So I think, as I said at the beginning, our role, or at least what I think is my role and the role of the team I belong to, is to be one of the projects that actually reinforce trust in the tool that we are using. And again, I think that potentially it could be extremely important and extremely useful and extremely beneficial, both for nature and people. But of course, as almost on everything, there's good people, bad people, and will be a never-ending fight between them. I think if you think you are among the good people and you are genuinely interested in giving your contribution, set up a good carbon project with all the necessary care, and that will contribute to, to move the balance on the right way. But I think it's really having a financial tool that ensure long-term economic sustainability of forest protection and forest restoration project right now, historically, is extremely important. So for sure, there's a lot of issues. For sure, there's just people trading and cheating because they want to look good, and at the same time they see financial opportunities in the carbon trade. At the same time, the potentials of changing the way conservation on the ground is implemented, especially for forest and biodiversity, carbon credits still a fantastic potential tool. So it's up to us to make it work the best possible way.
Thank you very much. That was brilliant, as always. Okay, so there are a couple of questions in the chat. I just want to address one that came up from Yusuf Adam, and he asked if the presentation slides will be made available. So the talk is actually being recorded, and it will be available on the Share Screen Africa website in about a week's time. Then Yusuf Michele has it's not quite a question, it's more I feel like a request. But he says, greetings, I'm Yusuf from South Africa. I wish to learn about carbon credit in the context of blue economy developmental participation for coastal communities. Are you familiar on that topic at all?
I mean, I know what it is, but I never worked on that component. And I would say that from the theoretical side, there's a lot of resources online. You know, if someone spend a little bit of time in terms of finding the most updated ones and the most relevant ones, you can gain, gain a lot of really relevant information. I think there's a huge divide, let's say, between what you can learn from even a person like me, or online resources, or a book, or a video, and what you can learn by try to implement it. I think solutions come from actions. Otherwise, they remain theoretical. So my invitation is to put together the right team with the right competence and try to do it. Maybe at small scale, maybe also by failing and trying again. But I think action is very important. Another thing I would like to say, which I didn't say, is the standards, of course, they have their own rules, but they rely on a market. They make their living by working with the market. So they are paid by the people implementing projects. So I think there's room for creating projects which are not necessarily easy to be recognized by the standard right now. And I'm talking about small to medium projects that can, for example, aggregate together and try to reduce the cost of certification and producing all the relevant documents. And I think discussing this with the standard, so just asking for a chat and discussing the initiative and how can be included in their standard is a good way to understand the criticalities of doing this. Because I think in general, what should happen in Africa is not, let's say, relatively few large projects implemented by big companies with brokers and big corporations funding them. Rather, thousands and thousands and thousands of small and medium projects implemented by people on the ground without necessarily the need of intermediaries, without the need of brokers, just by acquiring the right information and putting the right teams together.
Thank you, Michele. That's I see Yusuf, unfortunately, as you started answering the question, he dropped off, but luckily this is, like I said, recorded. But I think it's me speaking now as not an expert at all on this, but it's new. So we're still learning as we go with every project and everything that
It
goes
is.
on. And as you said, we learn by making mistakes. So yeah, I see Johan has his hand up, but I just want to get to Max's question, and I was wondering, Max, because it's quite a few questions on top of each other. Would you want to maybe unmute yourself and become part of the live conversation?
Can you hear
Hi,
me?
Max. Hi.
Yeah,
Yes.
great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, my question was mostly on the how our local ecosystem conditions are accounted for such reforestation and afforestation projects. So the example that I'm talking about is that there has been also scientific publications brought out recently that, for example, is sharing information that not all carbon credit projects are always that valuable when you are planting trees that are not local or naturally occurring in this area. So I'm talking about, for example, on grassland savanna ecosystems. So how are these projects are then dealt with, and what can be done as an alternative, basically?
Okay, in the past, the standards were accepting also, let's say, a forest, the afforestation of known forest areas, for example, natural grassland as project. Now is much more difficult. The standards also went through their own evolution. And now, I mean, if you compromise an habitat by planting trees where they shouldn't be planted, I think now it's very difficult to get the certification from a standard. So you are not going to produce any carbon credit. One thing that you can do, of course, is afforestation, just planting, you know, commercial trees like teak somewhere because is a place which was already deforested or already a site for afforestation. In our case, what I actually promote is a forest restoration through tree planting and assisted natural regeneration, meaning that we only plant indigenous trees. There's a tropical botanist that is able to understand and create the right composition of tree species with all the pioneers and the trees that actually can germinate after that the pioneers have shaded out the ground and all of that. And basically is to trigger a natural restoration of the forest. So you just trigger it by helping, by planting, because of course you have one thing that prevent forest trees to germinate or to survive in a deforested area is the temperature and the humidity of the soil, which doesn't allow the forest trees to survive or to germinate. So you have to, you know, to help the condition to be right, but basically is a trigger, and which can last several years. But basically, you plant thousands of trees in order in the right composition in order to do it. So I would say that now also the standards are very careful about planting the right trees in the right place, not compromise any natural habitats. Otherwise, it's very difficult to get registered and validated.
Max, did that?
Yeah, perfectly. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to hand over to Johan. Johan, you're welcome to ask your question.
Hi, Michele.
Hi, Johan.
Michele, so you mentioned farmers quite often in the presentation. So I was wondering, can a farmer only be credited for replacing a farming activity with a rather pristine ecosystem, or is there a way of farming that can be credited? For instance, if you practice soil health practices, or for instance, I saw Jamie Paulson was in here earlier from the University of the Free State, and she teaches high density grazing, which has been proven to improve carbon mitigation. So just wondering on how does that work?
You can do both. In our case, we wanted to create a mosaic of indigenous forests and farms. And so basically we do, in certain plots, we do forest restoration, as I described before. In other plots, and we are starting right now, we actually promote and trigger agroforestry, that can be a crediting activity. Basically, everything that doesn't compromise the natural habitat, in case there's any left, and can be measured in terms of reducing the carbon emission or avoiding carbon emission or sequestrating more carbon from the atmosphere, can become a crediting activity, and can be forest restoration, agroforestry, working on soil, working on the combination of all these things and packaging together. So it can be done. So we can have farmland that become crediting activities, and at the same time they help restoring, let's say, not to a natural state, but to a better, level, both local vegetation and biodiversity. But for example, creating edges that become, trees, and farming between edges, and edges become little corridors for, small mammals moving from a forest fragment to another, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I think we can be quite creative in terms of designing the way the project is going to be.
Thanks, Michele. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Johan. And now I'm going to hand over to John. John, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, please. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Michele, for that wonderful presentation. You actually did justice to demystifying carbon credits, and I've really learned a lot.
Thank you.
But one aspect that I need a bit of a clarification from is where you talked about the process, of establishing a carbon project, right? Where you then get to co-benefits. Okay. I
Yes.
want to ask if it can be worked backwards, because you mentioned biodiversity projects being maybe part of the co-benefits and all of that. What if someone starts a project, for instance, that is focused on conservation, biodiversity conservation, and then along the line find out that this also feeds into carbon credit project? Can it be worked backwards? Part of my question also, I think Johan asked it, where maybe part of that conservation project is, you're planting trees, training farmers to carry out their farming activities in a more sustainable way and all of that. So when you come to realize that that all fits into the carbon credit project, can it be worked backwards?
I think it depends on the standard, but in general, I think it could be. Of course, we didn't discuss the newcomer, the baby, which is the biodiversity market. Of course, you could design a project that is mostly dedicated or devoted to biodiversity conservation or biodiversity restoration. And you can have a set of activities that produce results that can be measured. Is a little bit more complex than measuring the carbon. I mean, measuring biodiversity, you have various levels and a lot more, complexity, but can be done. So you can start with that. And of course, in that case, is a biodiversity credit project. So I don't know if it can be turned into a carbon one. But what I know is that you can start with a carbon project with different components, and you can, on the way, add new components. But for the biodiversity component, if it's in the carbon project, it's going to be a co-benefit. So it cannot be the main thing, because basically in the biodiversity project, you trade biodiversity restoration. So you trade the delta between before and after. So that's your product. In a carbon project, you trade the carbon, the delta before and after. You can add components, but that's your main product. So I would say that if you start as a carbon project, biodiversity can only be a co-benefit. If you start a biodiversity project, I'm not sure the carbon can be added as a component. So also because the way standards have structured their way to work these things out. So this is my understanding.
Thank you, Michele. John, did that clarify things for you?
Yes, I think so. I'll just do further findings and yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe
right.
one note on the biodiversity credits is that I define it as a baby because the market is still very, very, very small. And there's still quite serious challenges. But there's people who have started implementing them, and we actually want to do it as well. We are still in a phase of understanding better how and so on. And of course, if a biodiversity credit project is overlapping with a carbon one, you have always to consider the additionality, meaning are the action implemented in the context of the carbon project the action that actually also restore biodiversity? If yes, you can't have additionality for the biodiversity. So you always need to work out these various components because basically you have to value financially every action you implement. And if the carbon is already restoring habitat and protecting biodiversity because it's part of the design, there's no room for a biodiversity project. But in my opinion, sometimes it's possible to stack them together. For example, just to conclude, the carbon project rely on the the biodiversity conservation in a carbon project rely on protecting the forest. And as a consequence, you protect the inhabitants of the forest, like the birds and the reptiles and and the mammals. But in an area where you have a very high level illegal trade of animals, for example, illegal trade of amphibians or butterflies or mammals, or the forest protection as usual doesn't actually affect that thing, meaning that you have to implement extra activities to also cope or curb that kind of component, and you can value that component. It could become a project by itself.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just thinking about it, I think there is a very thin line that separates carbon projects and biodiversity conservation project. So in most cases, there are overlaps.
Yes.
Where there is a bit of a challenge is in terms of policy. You know, what kind of policy backs whatever project that you're implementing. So thank you very much for that insight. Thank you.
You are very welcome.
Thank you, John. Okay, I'm going to head back to the chat. Mlamuleli from Lausanne State University asks, how best can the carbon credit project be registered in areas where there is no clear legislation for such a project?
That's an interesting question. Okay, there are, in general, many countries now have produced a policy on carbon credits trade. Many projects have started before these policies. The problem is that when you start a project, of course, you have a lot of assumptions in terms of finance, assumptions in terms of investment and costs, assumptions in terms of revenue. And in absence of a policy, those assumptions are actually quite serious because you don't know how much taxes you are going to pay, how much carbon share the benefit sharing with the local communities. You don't know if it's something that you can decide with the local communities or the government decide and a certain percentage. So it is a little bit of a jump in the void. So it could be difficult. But I know that in many countries, especially if you have a little bit of a conservative approach, you can start, and then you cope with the policy even if it's issued after the starting. Of course, as a player, you can sit down at the table with the government and try to find the best solution, because also it's in the interest of the government being a place attractive for projects, and being a player, you become, you know, a quite important, you know, entity to discuss what make that specific area attractive or not, which doesn't mean that it's easy, but, you know, I think can be done. For sure, the absence of a policy is force the project implementers in having quite a few assumptions that sometimes can be a little bit dangerous.
Let me just see, Mlamuleli, are you able to unmute yourself? I just wanted to find out, are you happy? Did you have something to add or question?
Yo, Marit, I know. I think I've been answered from what he said. I think you work and then adapt as you go. I think in a nutshell, that's what I got. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Continue the recording. I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, so there's a next question from Fortune Germain, and he asks, can you give clarity on the issue of forests reaching a plateau, particularly in respect to the carbon credit values?
Cool. We should ask this to my friend Andrea, the botanist. What can I say is tropical forests have quite a, again, I think this should be asked to a proper botanist, a tropical botanist, someone who knows well tree cycles. From what I learned from them is that in our case, for example, tropical forests have quite a rapid cycle. So trees, of course, trees can live few hundred years, but rarely they live in the forest. Outside is, I mean, in dry areas is another thing, but rarely they live thousands of years, like something happened in dry areas, meaning that they grow quite rapid. Of course, this varies a lot across species, and they reach a plateau quite rapidly. I would say between 30 and 50 years. While in conifer forests, it could go on up to 60, 70, 80, 100. So they keep growing. They are slower, but they are long. They grow for a longer time. So I think it depends a lot where your site, what kind of trees you're planting, and how the average temperature and humidity and all of that affect the growth rate of the trees. I think a lot of this information are available out there, and of course your duration should basically define the period of the project which is financed by investments shouldn't exceed the time through which the forest reach or get close to the plateau. But of course, again, permanence, even if when it reaches the plateau, it must stay there. There's still, of course, even at a lower rate, there's still growth and carbon storage, carbon sequestration. But, you know, if it's taken away, everything was, you know, is lost.
I just wanted to check, Fortune, did you want to add something, or did this raise another question, or are you happy?
I'm happy. Thank you very much.
Okay, brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fortune. All right, there is quite a loaded comment from Duncan, and I see he's got a question as well. Duncan, did you want to come in live and join the conversation, or would you like me to read it out for you? I've asked you to unmute. It's Duncan Koya from Kenya.
Good afternoon. I am Duncan Koya from Kenya.
Good afternoon, Duncan.
And I am very happy with the topic on carbon credits. And I just add on the comment that one of the challenges that we see here in the local community is the fact of denials. In the SS that maybe the community has no any idea on this thing called carbon credits. And you must appreciate the fact that when we talk of carbon credits, we must have understand the elements of human being the main source of these carbons, especially the greenhouse gases and so on. So I was really concerned about, you talk of this special process where you talk about, the process starting from now designing a project to, verification and so on. So now when we talk of removals, and some people or brokers coming up with an idea of compensating people or giving some money to the owners of lands before even taking a steps on how you put people on a civic education to know that actually they are the ones who are emitting these carbons. Now you move to the steps of issuing money before you now start a process of telling them you are the main source of these carbons, and then now educating them to appreciate the fact that the Forest and Habitat Restoration Act as carbon sink in that particular matter. So that's one of my concern. Number two is I wanted you to talk about the water bodies. Because you see now we have the interactions of toxic substance and the water bodies, the pollution resulting from surface runoff. And does it really contribute to this problem of carbon? I mean, does it contribute to this issue of releasing more carbon to the atmosphere and maybe resulting to some kinds of acidic rains, as we see in most part of the landscape? So that's all about my concern.
Thank you, Duncan. Not easy. Okay, regarding the communities, basically, as always, you need a strategy. In our case, so I work in Tanzania, but our organization basically is 52 people, one European, which is me, one South African, and 50 Tanzanians. Of course, you have to design a strategy that through which you sensitize the people you are going to work with, because of course, and the way we see this, and also the way that the national policy in Tanzania, I don't know in Kenya, see this. Basically, the local community here on the national policies are called the managing authority, meaning that we don't compensate them for the use of their land. We enter into a partnership. In fact, we don't have a contract with them, we have a partnership agreement. So we together enter into a partnership for 30 years. And we have some commitments and they have some commitments. We have some costs, they have some costs. We have some benefits, they have some benefits. Actually, our benefits is about the forest because we are a not-for-profit. So we channel back everything into the community, the forest, the protection, the covering the cost. But as you said, explaining the concept of the carbon credit is not easy. And it could happen. So you mean that you need someone who is able to convey these complex concepts in an easy way. For example, you don't need to necessarily know exactly how a carbon credit works, but you need to know that trees help to purify the water, purify the air, or improve the quality of the air. And by doing this, there's people that are willing to fund, to support the planting of trees, because the trees help the improvement of the quality of the air by sequestration of CO2. And if they are willing to plant trees in their land and enter into this partnership, they can be paid for the work they do, and the result is the improvement of the quality of the air. And then you start from here, and slowly you get to the concept of the carbon credit, which is the element that summarize the way the quality of the air has been improved and is paid for. So, of course, before starting, you need to design a way to convey the message to the community. Then, and also I have seen that they have also their reference. They talk at the district level, as often the district at the regional level. There's people who can tell them and explain in their own way what is happening at national level, because if they have a policy, the regional, you know, commissioner and the district commissioner, they got a little bit of education regarding it. So basically, you have to create the context in which they are confident about what you're telling them. But it's a process. It can take months or a year, so it's not easy. So the preparation is a long process. Regarding the water, I would say that also water can be an element of improvement or detrimental to the carbon levels in the atmosphere, regarding especially the infrastructure that are used to store water, transport water, and so on. And the water pollution, of course, is a problem, but I see more the role of the water more in terms of infrastructure for distribution and storage than the pollution itself, which is a problem in itself.
Thank you so much, Michele. Duncan, did you want to add something, or?
Yeah, maybe just to add something is that in Kenya, actually now they start big problems. It's good for you to know that most of the people who are doing this issue of carbon credit still have there's a lot of confusion. And maybe for our lecturer today, I forgot his name, maybe Dr.
Michele.
Dr. Michele.
Yeah.
Mick.
Yes. Maybe finding a way to have this kind of conversation in Kenya, and maybe people will tend to understand. Because in my side, I have really captured almost everything you talk, which are very, very important. And but now I appreciate the fact that there is no way you can achieve the last steps if the first one is not fully implemented. Yeah,
I agree. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I'm happy to talk about these things. I mean, you can, I don't know if it's possible to do another share screen Africa event for Kenya. I don't know. Probably you could discuss this with Maret, and
Yes,
in the
we
coming
can.
months we can arrange something.
Yeah.
Yeah, because okay, because my concern again is now this thing should be a sustainable kind of thing where we teach the future generations and ensure that we have intergenerations kind of thing, so that we build to I mean something that is sustainable model.
I fully agree.
Now this one, I'm saying that this information should be starting from the most lower level of the community, which are the younger generations.
Mm.
Yes.
I agree, and it's not easy.
Okay.
Duncan, we'll be in touch with you, definitely. And when the recording is available, I'll make sure that I've made a note for myself. We'll share it with you. It will be on our website, but then you can share the link as well. Because as you said, the talk really covered everything. So, but we'll be in touch with you to organize something for Kenya in terms of the carbon credits. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Duncan.
Thank you.
All right, let me hand over to Johan again. Johan's got another question. Johan, floor is yours.
Michele, I want to ask another like really practical question again. If you travel through many African countries, the land is subdivided into really small farms, like maybe quarter of a hectare. How many farmers do you need to make something like this worthwhile? I'm going to guess that you can't do it on your own. And then my second question would be, please, as a person who would be running a project like this, what kind of competencies do you need? And who would be your partners in a project like this? If you would start, who would be the first person you send an email to?
Okay. The first question, in terms of size, we have decided to work with farmers that on average have probably between 2 and 4 acres, so very small piece of land. And of course, what we do is we check how, when they demonstrate interest and they want to join the project, we ensure that they have enough land for food security, so they cannot give us all the land they have, because of course it will be turned from farming to cash. So they might retain what is enough to feed the entire family, and what is left, so what they have additionally, can be allocated to the project. So of course, an easier way is to find someone with a huge piece of land. So you interact with one entity, you do one contract, super easy, you go. We don't like easy things, so basically we work with hundreds of farmers. And I would say that to make it sustainable, probably you need at least 300-400 hectares. So if each farmer has 4 acres, is quite a few of them. But you can design a project in which you start small. I think the big barrier is being able to produce the project document, which is a highly technical document. They usually organization, hire a consultant to do it. We did it ourselves. It took a lot of time and a lot of understanding. But I think what should happen, and I think what should be also, is that multiple groups of farmers can get together, and having, an entity that can be an NGO with the right technical competence that help them at the beginning to put together all the necessary bits to be eligible for the standard. So they share that kind of cost, in order to be able to have thousands of projects out there run by local people. I think it's possible, not yet, but I think it should be, and it will be. In terms of competence, I think right now you need actually a very good botanist. You need someone able to read, who knows well how these things work and is able to write these documents. So I think you need two levels. A small team of 3-4 people who are able to put all these things together. And an organization, I think there's 2 main elements to make the project successful. Being able to cope with the complexity, so writing the documents, understanding the market, all of that. And I think you can find those people here and there. So, of course, the second one, equally important, is to have either an organization or the confederation of local community members who are able to communicate with the village, the district, the region, so with the community itself. So you have to combine these two, technical competence and social, cultural competence. And these 2 things make the project working. Usually what happens is that, which I think should be avoided, but it is happening a lot, that you have a big corporation that hire a broker. The broker actually put together the technical competence and find someone on the ground to be able to talk with the communities and get a big share of the money. I think actually the broker fee, the broker layer can be actually avoided. Of course, there's more work to be done, but I think in any country, there's people that can learn what needs to be done. You know, you find here in Tanzania, you find a good, smart, you know, graduated in economy. If he start documenting himself and following webinars and stuff and talking to people, he can actually get to a position where he's able to do it. And you put together these few people. So you avoid the broker, but because you have already your little pool of competent people, and they're already Tanzanian, so they know how the community work. What one big barrier when people from abroad try to, you know, to pull their hands of big chunk of lands in African countries, they don't know how to deal with the ground, and they try to find a local NGO able to do it or a local company. But if the local company is able to do it, they can do it for themselves. They don't need a broker, so they need just to join with this, you know, with these other people and having both the component and the social, cultural competence to do, I mean, to implement the project. And it's possible to start with pilots, with smaller ones, 200 hectares. Of course, the barrier is still producing the right documents. It could take time, and maybe you need a little bit of consultancy. But if you structure yourself quite solidly and you find a good investor that say, okay, I trust you guys, and he put there, you know, the 30, 40, $50,000 that are needed to make sure that all the initial documents and information are in place, then you go. Because what happens is the brokers, they solve all the problems, but they get a big chunk of the money. And money should stay on the ground, should stay with the local communities and local enterprises. Also, something I didn't say, all these things basically are linked to a market, means that, and we are kind of exploring the possibility here. You know, a young, smart entrepreneur in Tanzania or in Kenya or in Zambia or in Botswana, instead of opening a shop or becoming a car dealer for a living, he can actually put that team together and become a carbon entrepreneur. He knows already how to communicate with the community. Maybe he goes in his own homeland, but he has, you know, maybe he has a degree, so he understands how to put this competence together, and it become an entrepreneurial activity. But at the same time, it benefits people, nature, trees, climate. So all these things should be seen not just as a traditional NGO conservation activity, but also something that is linked to a market, and it can bring in a lot of people which would have never be part of a conservation related process.
Okay, thanks, Michele. Thank you, Johan. And then, Kristen, have you lost your question, or was it?
No, I've got my question. I was just worried about time, but I'm here. Thank you very much, Michele. That was really super.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And yeah, I enjoy our conversation around a fire. So the next time we'll have to continue this as well because it's really fascinating. I wanted to ask about a different biome. I'm sitting in the Cape in South Africa, and here we have fynbos. I'm sure you're aware of fynbos, hey, Michele? And in general, it's not a treed landscape. Except for all the invasive trees that have come in, mostly Australian. And I was just wondering, I mean, in kind of clearing trees, because obviously they're a problem with water, drawing so much water and biodiversity loss. In clearing them, we're also releasing a lot of carbon and preventing carbon absorption. But I would imagine it's more of a biodiversity credit situation. Is that what you would think?
Again, I think we should have a botanist here. And maybe next time, if there's a next time, I would love to involve also Andrea, who's very, very competent on these type of things. But what I would say is, of course, a habitat like the fynbos could be a good place for biodiversity credits. I mean, of course, again, it's a baby market, so we have to make sure that it's really gonna work first. But first, when we remove trees because they are invasive, if they're not burned, so if they're turned into furniture, the carbon stays storage, the carbon storage is still there. So what shouldn't be done is to let them decay, and then they release very slowly the carbon back in the atmosphere, or burn them. So they shouldn't become firewood. If the wood is still there somewhere into a chair or into a desk, fine, it's there. Then there's actually no arboreal environment that can actually store a lot of carbon. In the balance between the above ground biomass and what they transfer to the soil, so of course it need to be evaluated, and I'm not aware about the fynbos specifically if it's the case, but there's herbaceous plants or shrubs in natural shrubland that they can store enough carbon for a carbon project. So even if you don't have trees, of course it's always like a balance between the cost. So if it's, for example, assisted natural regeneration, you don't need nursery, you don't need a lot of cost related. You just remove the disturbances, you let the environment recovering by itself, and you can claim carbon credits from that. So I would say that every specific situation need to be evaluated specifically, and there's situation in which you don't necessarily need the trees to be eligible or viable for a carbon project.
All right. So I see we have actually run out of time. We're at the end of the session, and I just wanted to add quickly that when you were talking about the invasive tree species, that tomorrow's workshop, Dr. Romain Perard will be talking about carbon pricing, how carbon pricing can reduce alien tree invasion. So he's going to be talking about that topic. And then he's going to be joined by Jackson Godfrey Ngoni, and he's going to be talking. His talk is titled "The Carbon Catalyst: Driving Sustainable Off-Grid Solar Adoption." So join us tomorrow for those two talks. And Michele, did you have any words that you want to leave us with?
Something I said already. I think in the last 2-3 years, there has been a lot of setbacks for the carbon project because of scams and articles in newspapers, and that led to a loss of trust. I think it's still potentially an incredibly useful tool. And again, our role, I think, is to change the balance where the good projects are more than the bad ones, which is the summary of our history on this planet, trying to a constant fight between trying to do the good instead of the bad, and trying to fight the balance and turn it positive. So don't lose trust, don't be negative. If you feel that you are in a position to try to do something like this, go for it.
Thanks, Michele. I just wanted to go over the key learning outcomes again, or I'll just put them on the screen. And then I just wanted to ask Robert to just end things off for us with just a couple of words again. So, Robert, are you there?
Yes, Marit, I'm here.
Okay, Robert, floor is yours.
All right. Well, I just have a few words. Thank you so much, Dr. Michele, for sharing your wisdom with us. I personally learned a ton, especially I love the part where you said whatever you bring to the community should be added value. So that really stuck with me. We young people are always being told you are the future. But I think today was a reminder that actually we are also very much the present. We are
Very
not
true.
we are not just the ones who will deal with the outcomes. We are also the ones who will need to help shape the solution. Yeah, I think to every young person like me out there who was listening, let's stay curious, keep learning, ask the hard questions. The more we understand how things work, the louder and clearer our voice gets. So I thank you very much, and I hope whoever was here today will be back tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Robert,
you,
for
Robert.
kind words.
And I echo what Robert has said. Thank you very much, Michele. We really appreciate it. We know that you are very, very busy. So thank you for taking the time to do this talk for us. And I think it was a very successful session with, I think, many questions answered and many new questions arising. So we'll definitely be in touch with you for future connections. And then just a reminder again that the workshop continues tomorrow with Dr. Romain Pirard and Jackson Godfrey Mungoni. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the afternoon, and we will see you all again tomorrow.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
Maret,
evening.
and thank you, everyone.